All right, guys, so today we're going to look at reciprocal trig functions. So we've been working with sine, cosine, and tangent. And from SOHCAHTOA, I know that sine is my opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. But what about if I had hypotenuse over opposite? What would that be? Or hypotenuse over adjacent? What would that be? Or adjacent over opposite? What would that be? So we do have names for those ratios, and this is going to be a reciprocal trig functions. If we just recall what this phrase reciprocal means take that fraction and flip it. So my numerator is now my denominator, and my denominator is now my numerator. So let's take a look at what these names of the functions are. So our first one is cosecant. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Now I'm going to write these functions written out. Usually we just see sine, S-I-N, but that's the full word of the function sine. So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Again, we're not going to see this whole phrase cosecant written out always. We might just see it as the abbreviation cosecant. So cosecant of theta is the reciprocal of sine. So if sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosecant is going to be hypotenuse over opposite. Our next one is secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So this is cosecant, but we may see it as the, this is secant, but we may see it as the abbreviation SEC of theta. And if we look at what cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So secant is going to be hypotenuse over adjacent. Our last one is cotangent, and cotangent is going to be the reciprocal of tangent. So we have sine, cosine, and this is now the reciprocal of tangent. So cotangent we're going to see as COT of theta, and that is equal to, well, if we look what tangent is opposite over adjacent. So cotangent is going to be adjacent over opposite. So I just want to help us organize these a little bit. We know sine, cosine, and tangent. If we write out SOHCAHTOA, these help me know the ratios for sine, cosine, and tangent. So if you know those, the only thing that you need to be able to do, and how I like to remember this, is that you're always going to put an S function with a C function. So for sine is going to go with cosecant. The S is going to go with a C. Cosine is going to go with secant. Again, a C is going to go with the S. And then tangent and cotangent just go together because they have the same name in it. They both have tangent in it. So I think that one's easier to remember. So tangent goes with cotangent. So if you know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, looking at this, if you see secant, then that's their way of telling you that you're going to have to do sine, but the flip of it, the reciprocal of this. So that would be the hypotenuse over opposite. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So that would be hypotenuse over adjacent. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. So that would be adjacent over opposite. One last thing on these that I do want to show you. Remember my favorite math meme with the Titanic meme? I know that's tangent is equal to sine of theta over cosine of theta. So if I have cotangent that is equal to cosine theta over sine of theta. So this will come into play later on in another lesson, but I just wanted to show you, since they are reciprocal functions, I could also flip those identities as well. All right, let's look at how this is going to look in questions. So if sine of theta is equal to 4 over 6, find the value of secant. As soon as you see one of these weird new functions, I want you to identify what the reciprocal function is. So secant, and S always goes with a C. So secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So cosine, and if I write SOHCAHTOA, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So secant, I'm just going to write this all down to organize my ideas. Secant is going to be the reciprocal of that. So hypotenuse over adjacent. All right, they give us a triangle and they tell me where my theta is, what angle I'm using, but they don't label anything for me. So we need to use the information they give us to label this. They tell me that sine is 4 over 6. Well, if I look at what sine is my opposite over hypotenuse. So here's my angle. This is going to be my opposite. This is my hypotenuse. So then this must be my adjacent. Let's just label all of our sides with what I know. My opposite is 4. My hypotenuse is 6. And I need my hypotenuse over adjacent, so I need to figure out what that adjacent side is. Again, when I have a triangle, it's a right triangle, I could use Pythagorean theorem. So 4 squared plus x squared equals 6 squared. Let's take a second. I want you guys to try to solve this for me and get a side for what that adjacent is. So I have 16 plus x squared equals 36. And if I subtract over that 16, I have 36 minus 16. I get x squared equals 20. So x is equal to radical 20. So this side is the square root of 20. And you could leave it just like that. So let's go back to what they're asking me. They want me to find the secant. So that is hypotenuse over adjacent. So secant of this angle is going to be my hypotenuse is 6. My adjacent side is radical 20. And this is my final answer. Okay, let's take a look at another one. If cotangent is radical 3 over 3, find the value of cosecant. So cotangent, that's one of our new functions. Cotangent goes with tangent. Cosecant, and S goes with a C, so cosecant goes with sine. So I like to write out my SOHCAHTOA to help me remember my ratios. So tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that means cotangent is really my adjacent over my opposite. Sine is really opposite over hypotenuse. So cosecant, and what they want me to ultimately find, is my hypotenuse over opposite. Okay, let's start labeling what I can on my triangle. They give me this angle, and they give me cotangent. So let's label this on my triangle. Cotangent, we found, is adjacent over opposite. So here is my opposite, here is my hypotenuse, and here is my adjacent. Let's label these sides. Adjacent, radical 3, opposite, 3. So I need to find this length of my hypotenuse. That way I could ultimately find my cosecant. So again, Pythagorean theorem, 3 squared plus radical 3 squared equals x squared. 9 plus 3 equals x squared. So square root of 12 equals x. beside my hypotenuse is the square root of 12. All right, again, ultimately, they were asking me for cosecant, which I know is hypotenuse over opposite. So lastly, I just need to write that ratio. Cosecant of theta is equal to my hypotenuse is radical 12, and my opposite is 3. And that is my final answer. All right, at this point, what I would like you to do is pause this video, and I want you to try questions number 3 and 4. When you are done, you are going to submit all of these 3 pages on Canvas for me. So pause this video, give these a try, and then I will go over them. All right, let's take a look. They want me to find cosecant, or they're giving me cosecant actually. I know that that goes with sine. And then they want secant, and I know that that goes with cosine. SOHCAHTOA. I know sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So what they're giving me here for secant is really my hypotenuse over my opposite. Cosine is really adjacent over hypotenuse, but they're asking for secant, so that's going to be the reciprocal. So hypotenuse over adjacent. That is what I ultimately need to find. Label what I can on my triangle from what they give me. Here's my angle. I know that this is my hypotenuse, this is my opposite, this is my adjacent. So let's label all the sides that they give me. My hypotenuse is 5, my opposite is 4. I need to find this adjacent side. So let's use Pythagorean theorem. X squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. Again, your hypotenuse has to be on the side by itself. The other 2 sides does not matter where it goes. So x squared plus 16 equals 25. And I'm going to continue to solve this. And I get 3. So ultimately, make sure that we answer our question. They asked me for secant. So secant of that angle is my hypotenuse, which is 5, over my adjacent, which we found to be 3. And that is my final answer. Okay, last one, secant. I know that secant goes with cosine. And cotangent, I know cotangent goes with tangent. So again, SOHCAHTOA. I know that cosine is really, just going to get rid of those. Cosine is my adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is my opposite over adjacent. So let's figure out what they gave me here. They gave me secant, so secant is then hypotenuse over adjacent. And cotangent, what I ultimately want to find, is my adjacent over the opposite. Here's the angle they gave me. This is my opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. And let's label what we have. Hypotenuse is the square root of 41. My adjacent is 5, and I need to find my opposite. So 5 squared plus x squared equals radical 41 squared. 25 plus x squared equals 41. And now let's just subtract that over to the other side. I get x squared equals 16. And let's take the square root of that, and I get 4. So let's label that side on my triangle. Again, ultimately, they're asking me for cotangent, which is adjacent over opposite. So cotangent of this angle is my adjacent, which is 5, over my opposite, which is 4. That is my final answer. All right, tomorrow we are going to continue to practice these, but I just want to let you guys have a few practice questions with this, and we will continue tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye.